Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray, and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English. We start this new edition right now. Another social leader has been assassinated in Colombia. This time it's Yenny Montaño, who was shot on Sunday in the Tumaco region, which saw a murder of campesinos early last month. Her death brings to 135 the number of social leaders killed this year. The latest killing happened a few hours after a march through the streets of Pasto to protest the killings of Narino leaders and corruption. Our correspondent is Natalia Margarita. She's in Tumaco and she sent this report.
We are still in the city of Tumaco, located in the Colombian Pacific, following up on the rise of killings of social and community leaders here in Nariño. The most recent victim of this wave of violence has been 48-year-old Colombian leader Luz Yenny Montaño. She was part of her neighborhood's community action board and was also involved in a few religious associations that defend victims and carry out important social work in the most vulnerable neighborhoods of Tumaco. What we do know is that the crime happened in her own neighborhood and that the authorities are currently investigating the circumstances behind it. Let's remember that this murder took place just a few weeks after another community leader, Jaya Cortez, was murdered in a rural area of Tumaco. Jaya was a member of Altamira and Fronteras Community Council and was regrettably murdered just a few weeks ago. There's a particularity in Jaya's case. In the days before his murder, he directly told the Colombian Vice President, Oscar Naranjo, that he feared for his life, and that of other leaders in the area. These warnings served no purpose, since he was also then murdered. Another important thing for context is that Jaya had been a leader in the same area where the state police massacred 9 campesinos. Let's not forget that this was a massacre where the police were directly involved, and Jaya was one of the first social leaders that denounced them. And just a few days later, he was silenced. This is all part of the increase in violence against social leaders. So far, in 2017, there's been over 120 murdered leaders. What people tell us, what they find hard to explain, is that in an era when a peace agreement has been signed between the FARC and the Colombian government, as well as having a bilateral ceasefire between the ELN and the government, how can it be possible that these murders keep taking place? Social organizations have urged both the national and regional governments to take measures that will safeguard the lives of those who partake in social leadership activities, as well as in peace consolidation.
Natalie Margarita there in Tumaco. Just as Venezuela has begun to restructure its foreign debt, the ratings agency Standards & Poor's announced the country was in selective default. The move has caused consternation on international markets, with some investors asking for clarification. The Venezuelan government has repeatedly said it will not default, and on Monday the vice president met with the vast majority of Venezuela's private creditors.
The first meeting between the Presidential Commission and representatives of the 414 private bondholders and creditors took place in Caracas. The administrative area of the Miraflores Palace was chosen as the site for the first encounter that seeks to restructure the $150 billion that Venezuela owns. The Latin American country is making its payments on time. In spite of the economic pressure, it is suffering from foreign countries through the imposition of illegal sanctions.
This attack from the US government in complicity with the Venezuelan opposition has closed a few paths left to Venezuela to work broadly with the international market.
The future potential Venezuela has allows it a certain margin to maneuver in spite of the efforts to drown us. The fact that we are the country with the biggest oil reserves, the fact that many of these bondholders are linked to major companies like BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, who also have a presence in the Orinoco oil belt, that gives us a strong position to be able to negotiate.
The United States imposed strong economic sanctions on Venezuela, which prohibit companies and private creditors from that country from purchasing new bonds from the Venezuelan government or from PDVSA, a measure which seeks to suffocate the country and block its international payments. With this meeting, private bondholders are defying these sanctions, looking at Venezuela as a place to invest, and now the price of oil is over $60 a barrel for the first time in 3 years.
They're doing this because mainly the oil price is going up. This is a country that has never stopped paying its debt and that is now looking for new opportunities and making sure the bondholders get paid.
Venezuela has reached several agreements to refinance its debt with countries like China and Russia. A new agreement will be signed in Moscow on Wednesday, November 15th, to restructure $3 billion over the next 10 years.
After these negotiations and with the agreements made on trips to Asia and Russia, there are major investors from those countries that have expressed their intention to support this negotiation and provide a sort of a guarantee on the market. And by the time the debt loses value, the markets will go and buy it up and make a really good deal getting debt that we know Venezuela has always paid.
US President Donald Trump's sanctions are seeking to push Venezuela into default, while President Nicolas Maduro's restructuring defends the sovereignty and the stability of the country. In the last 3 years, Venezuela has paid over $723 billion of its external debt, which guarantees the trust of foreign creditors.
The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has been meeting with European ambassadors in Caracas after the EU's decision to impose sanctions on the country. A communique from the Foreign Ministry says the measures against the Venezuelan people are illegal, absurd and inefficient and show the subordination of the EU's institutions to the rulings of the US administration. Coming on the eve of the resumption of dialogue with Venezuela's opposition, it says the sanctions seek the failure of those talks and encourage those who've generated political violence. Our correspondent Reagan Devines joins us now live from Caracas. Hello, Reagan. So the Venezuelan government says it has made a very successful start to its restructuring its debt, yet the ratings agency Standard & Poor's have declared a partial default. What's actually going on?
Yeah, hi Sony, good afternoon to everyone. Yes, according to Bloomberg Markets, S&P Global rating says that Venezuela has missed 2 of its payments, totaling some $200 million in coupon payments on global bonds that are due in 2019 and 2024. It also claims that there are 4 more payments that are due, totaling some $420 million, but are not immediately a threat or urgently needed because they fall within a 30-month grace period. And Bloomberg says that it claims that Venezuela is now under default and that bondholders do not care. Of course, this comes after yesterday's meeting with bondholders between the vice president, Venezuela's vice president, and the economy minister. And President Maduro says that the meeting was fruitful. This is not what we're hearing internationally, obviously. Internationally, we're saying that Venezuela is close to default and it has no choice, but these are serious consequences. If Venezuela were to default, of course, the first thing that bondholders would have access to most likely would be PDVSA and its assets. And of course, if they got access to this would deny millions of Venezuelans from their much-needed social services. So we're getting many mixed reactions out of this, as we were not permitted inside the meetings yesterday. However, as I said, President Nicolas Maduro said that these meetings were fruitful. And of course, this is all under the vein of Venezuela trying to restructure, renegotiate its $60 billion debt with the help of China, Russia, which Maduro again says is going ahead quite well.
Reagan, there have been new reactions to the European Union sanctions against Venezuela.
Well, yesterday we had heard from Venezuela's ambassador to the UN Security Council, Ambassador Rimes, who called the nature of the meeting that they had yesterday as illegal, saying that discussion of Venezuela was not on the agenda, and that the United States is trying to influence these very important Security Council ambassadors to pursue its own agenda to topple Maduro's government and move henceforth with the agenda of the local opposition. So what we're hearing right now is many denouncements coming from the government, reminding the international community that Venezuela is a sovereign state, that it is an independent nation, and that according to the last few elections, the regional elections, the National Constituent Assembly elections, that the majority of Venezuelans want control of their own destiny, their own path forward. They do not want international interference, and they reject the constant attempts by the United States government to influence anything that happens here. Of course, as comes in the context as preparations continue for the upcoming municipal elections, which frankly has Venezuela quite nervous with the recent moves by the government against opposition leaders, where we see Freddy Guevara, who took refuge in the Chilean embassy here in Caracas. And so we're not certain whether or not violence again is anticipated, but as far as we know, the government is taking all precautionary measures to ensure that a repeat of those months, those April to July months this year, we do not see those again in Soini.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We've been talking to Reagan Devines, our Caracas correspondent. And we have more news in a minute, so stay with us. Women have been mobilizing across Brazil after a special committee of the Congress approved measures to criminalize abortion. At least 20 Brazilian states saw protests. One of the largest was in Sao Paulo.
Around 10,000 Brazilian women marched in the city of Sao Paulo against the proposed Constitutional Amendment 181, which prohibits abortion in cases of rape, anencephaly, or even when the mother's life is in danger.
The conversation about the biological part is out of place now. We are social beings. The unexpected can happen and we have to deal with it. But it's much worse if we have to do it in secret, blaming yourself and thinking it's wrong. I've had 2 abortions and I support the legalization of abortion.
This new conservative measure from the Congress, after the impeachment against Rousseff, come on top of the flexible labor reform or labor flexibility, the freezing of social spending for 20 years, the extension of subcontracting, and the privatization of Petrobras, among other setbacks.
A rapist is not a father. Women in Brazil and the entire world deserve to be able to have a safe abortion because we give life, and we have the right to life, and nobody can take away our right to choose. These were 18 men who supported the criminalization of abortion for women victims of rape.
The result of the vote in the special committee of the lower house was 18-1, 18 men in favor, 1 woman against.
We are suffering a major crisis, and politicians are using this important moment to impose what they want on the people, especially on women's bodies.
The project still has to be approved by the full lower house, but Brazilian women are already organizing new demonstrations to stop a measure that endangers their lives.
So for more details on that story, we join our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Limas, for the details.
Across 20 Brazilian states, women protested against the draft law 181 that bans and criminalizes all cases of abortion, even in cases of anencephaly or violence, rape, or life-threatening to the mother. The law comes from a special commission in Congress with 18 male votes against 1 female vote, 18 men representatives against only 1 woman. That's why women protest all over the country, and there are against 18 representatives that voted for this project. That has already garnered a lot of rejection in Sao Paulo alone. 10,000 women rallied against this project that puts Brazilian women's lives in direct danger. We'll keep you reporting here from Sao Paulo.
Thanks to Ignacio Limas for that report. Monday saw the end of the Amazon Log 2017 military exercises in the Brazilian municipality of Tabatinga, which is located on the border with Peru and Colombia. During the exercises, training for emergency situations were performed, led by the Brazilian Army. Observers from over 20 countries were present during the exercises, but the United States had a leading role.
After 7 days of social actions and disaster simulations staged from a temporary military base in Tabatinga in the middle of the Amazon, there's a lingering suspicion about the true motive for the prominent role played by the United States during Amazon Log 2017. Analysts guarantee that these military exercises done under the guise of gaining experience about humanitarian aid would be useful to the United States in order to try to close the fence that has been installed around Venezuela, a country that has the largest oil reserves on the planet.
The decision by Temer's government to allow these exercises revealed an accelerated loss of sovereignty and a process of submission by the Brazilian government to North American interests. This never happened before, and more importantly, during moments like this, when Trump issues public threats against Venezuela, the presence of North Americans so close to the Venezuelan border obviously works as an intimidation technique.
Unlike other observers, the United States had a guaranteed place in all joint state meetings, along with representatives from Brazil, Colombia and Peru, countries that were leading the military exercises.
I believe this is a strategy to show that both Brazil and the United States will be willing to intervene in the Venezuelan conflict as a way of aiding the opposition of the legitimate Venezuelan government.
Precisely one of the countries invited to observe the Amazon Log 2017 military exercises was Venezuela. The military attaché from Venezuela in Brazil trusts that his host will maintain Latin America as a land of peace.
Certainly, the presence of troops, of the media, of foreign elements in the region create worries. Regardless, we trust and we will always trust that the Brazilian army is an institution that guarantees the safekeeping of their land sovereignty, and therefore would never allow its territory to be used with the end of attacking a sister nation.
The Bolivarian nation's worry is valid. Adding to the involvement of the United States Southern Command, there's the fact that the South American trio leading the military exercise, Brazil, Peru and Colombia, are aligned with the OAS policy of diplomatically suffocating Venezuela. For many, Amazon Log seems to be a token where humanism is but an excuse.
A Mexican NGO is creating a new registry to record the names of the dead in a move to restore dignity to the victims of drug-related crimes. Mexican NGO Data Civica announced that it was compiling a database of names in addition to expanding the list of who's counted as missing. In 2016 alone, some 23,000 people were killed in violent incidents in Mexico. More than 100,000 people have died in drug-related violence over the last decade, and over 30,000 have disappeared under serious circumstances. The struggle to make the country safe for all remains a challenging one.
It's a very clear demand to the government. We are saying you have an opportunity to generate a registry that is convenient, reliable, complete, that helps in the search and helps also by centralizing database of local social organizations. Centralizing database from prosecutor's office to be able to generate a much more complete registry that helps relatives searching for their loved ones and missing people.
Governmental efforts are underway in El Salvador to develop solutions for the hundreds of thousands of Salvadorians living in the United States under the Temporary Protected Status, TPS, which is at risk of cancellation.
Donald Trump's announcement to revoke the TPS program has raised concerns for Salvadorian people. It has already revoked TPS for Nicaraguans and extended for 6 months permission for Hondurans. According to El Salvador's president, Sanchez Serén, the country is working to develop a permanent solution to the hundreds of thousands of Salvadorians covered under the program.
We've signed alliances with law firms in the United States to fight for human rights, Salvadorans' human rights, and we're going to work with consultancies to help them to acquire their citizenship.
With a possible suspension coming, Salvadorian Foreign Minister has developed measures like lobbying U.S. representatives, especially legalist advice for the 190,000 under TPS programs, and reform proposal to Salvadorians' laws for those repatriated.
So all the inputs, equipment, vehicles that bring those who return may be tax exempt. For example, if there's people that want to come back and bring their working tools, well, they should bring them and not pay any tax. A second package are fiscal incentives, so that repatriate may start a business.
Another program eliminated by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on November 10 is the Unaccompanied Central American Refugees Minor Program. Churches in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador condemned the suspension.
There are more than 10,000 children and adolescents with deportation orders from the U.S. government. We condemn all these actions, and we're deeply outraged by this failure to respect their human right and the right for family reunification.
A Salvadorian Representatives and Councilors Committee is traveling to the United States on December 6, looking for a permanent solution before the upcoming end of TPS.
We'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Lebanon's political crisis continues after Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri resigned from office on November 4th while in Saudi Arabia, and he has yet to return to Beirut. Our correspondent, Hibai Arbide, has more.
Buenas tardes, saludos a toda nuestra audiencia.
We are in Beirut following the controversy after Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri fled the country to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has called the Arab League members to a meeting this Sunday to condemn Iran for its actions in the region and denouncing Iran for interfering with other countries' national affairs. In response, Iran, with the support of Hezbollah, has said that Saudi Arabia that is actually the one interfering after they forced Hariri to resign from office and are keeping him from returning to Lebanon. Meanwhile, Hariri has said that his stay in Saudi Arabia is voluntary political. Parties in Lebanon are demanding his return. Lebanon's parliament president explained that Hariri's resignation is not valid since it wasn't done in Lebanon. As these events unfold, Lebanon's Christian Maronite patriarch arrived to Saudi Arabia on a historic visit and a rare act of religious openness for the kingdom. Hariri has said he will return to Lebanon, although there is no date set for this to happen.
Palestinian forces are now under threat after Israel destroyed a Gaza border tunnel that killed 12 Palestinian fighters. Our reporter Noah Harazin has the details.
2 weeks ago, and on the eastern border of Khan Yunis city in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli forces discovered a resistance tunnel that belongs to the Islamic Jihad and goes from the Gaza Strip into the Palestinian occupied territories into Israel. They attacked the tunnel, resulting in the killing of 12 Palestinian resistance fighters. Until now, Israel is getting hold of 5 bodies of those Palestinians who were killed in the tunnel attack. Yesterday, both the Palestinian side from the Islamic Jihad and the Israeli side exchanged threats over the incident. After that, we got news this morning that Israel on the borders of Gaza deployed the Iron Dome system in order to stop any resistant rockets that could be fired from the Gaza Strip into the southern settlements, Israeli settlements close to the border with Gaza.
A report from Noor Harazin. And now here are some of the other stories making headlines around the world.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has visited the victims of Sunday's major earthquake on the border with Iraq, which killed at least 540 people. He promised swift help to the thousands whose homes were destroyed. Many more have been forced to sleep outside, and the authorities are said to be struggling to provide aid to the victims. At least 10 people were killed in a suicide car bomb attack on the headquarters of UAE-trained security forces in Aden, Yemen. According to witnesses, they heard gunfire after the loud explosion. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the attack. The environmental group Greenpeace is suing Norway for issuing oil exploration licenses, which it says violates the government's commitment to the Paris Agreement on climate change. Greenpeace is challenging 10 licenses issued last year to drill for oil in the Barents Sea above the Arctic Circle.
Our aim is to get the court to invalidate the licenses that the government has handed out, which will set a very important precedent for how much environmental damage a government is allowed to do while they know it is wrong.
The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says that migrants are being detained in horrific conditions in Libya. Concerns have been raised regarding the European Union's policy of helping the Libyan Coast Guard in intercepting illegal crossings. Human rights groups have compared migrant detention centers to concentration camps.
Monitors were shocked by what they witnessed. Thousands of emaciated and traumatized men, women and children piled on top of one another, locked up in hangars with no access to the most basic necessities and stripped of their human dignity.
Kenya's Supreme Court will review petitions challenging President Uhuru Kenyatta's victory in last month's presidential election. The judges are expected to announce when proceedings will begin and whether it will hear all 3 petitions filed, one by a former lawmaker and the other by 2 civil society organizations. Kenyatta first came to power in 2013 and won a second and final term in controversial elections this October, which were boycotted by opposition leader Raila Odinga.
And with that, we've come to the end of this midday news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sonia Gray. Thank you so much for watching.